Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. From the outside, Adaora and Kenneth Nwosu's marriage was the very picture of perfection. Neighbors, church members, and business associates often pointed to them as an ideal couple. The God-fearing wife who stood loyally beside her husband through thick and thin, and the ambitious husband whose rise from nothing to a successful logistics business was nothing short of inspirational. Their two-story duplex in Lekki was modest by millionaire standards, yet warm and filled with Adaora's gentle touch, from the freshly tended flowers on the balcony to the delicious scent of egusi soup wafting through the air. Adaora had given up her teaching job when Kenneth's business took off, pouring all her time into supporting him, managing the home, and raising their beloved son, Jidenna. Their bond seemed unbreakable, their laughter genuine, and their dreams aligned, or so Adaora thought. Behind Kenneth's calm exterior and affectionate smiles, a storm was brewing. One Adaora's trusting heart was too blinded to sense. For several months, Adaora had been noticing little changes in her husband. It started subtly, late-night calls answered in hushed tones, work trips that grew longer and more frequent, and a growing disinterest in family devotions. She had confronted him gently once, suggesting he might be taking on too much, to which Kenneth replied with a forced smile and an absent-minded kiss on her forehead. "Everything is fine, love. Just chasing success for you and Jidenna," he had said. But Adaora, ever intuitive, couldn't shake the feeling that her husband was slowly drifting away. It was in the way he barely touched his food anymore, the way his eyes seemed to linger too long on his phone, and the new scent on his shirts that wasn't hers. She began waking up in the middle of the night, only to find him pacing in the living room or whispering into his phone. Her heart grew heavy with anxiety, but she buried her fears deep, praying silently for her husband to return to her fully, in body, mind, and soul. The illusion shattered one Sunday evening, when Kenneth returned home late from what he claimed was a business dinner. As he entered the house, the glow of his phone screen caught Adaora's eye. He was too tired to notice that he left it on the table unlocked as he stepped into the bathroom. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, heart pounding with the dread of what she feared to find. And there it was, a string of messages from someone named Bella, filled with pet names, kisses, and plans to get rid of the obstacle in their way. One voice note even said, "Don't worry, baby. Once she's gone, we can live freely. I'll make sure no one pities her." The room spun as Adaora sat on the edge of the couch, her world crumbling in silence. Her husband, the man she cooked for, prayed for, and loved with her soul, was not only cheating on her, but plotting with another woman to destroy her. A single tear fell down her cheek as Kenneth exited the bathroom, smiling at her with that same familiar warmth. But the woman before him had just awakened to a new reality, one where her perfect marriage was nothing but a cruel, well-decorated lie. Bella Okeke was everything Adaora was not: young, loud, flashy, and dangerously seductive. With skin like polished ebony and curves sculpted for sin, Bella had perfected the art of entrapment. She met Kenneth during one of his business trips to Abuja, where she worked as a hotel receptionist by day and a party girl by night. It didn't take long before she discovered Kenneth's financial status and began playing the long game. She laughed at his dry jokes, sent seductive pictures late at night, and stroked his ego like a goddess worshiping a king. Kenneth, flattered and drunk with attention, started pouring money into her life. She moved into a luxury apartment in Ikoyi, one paid for by the logistics company he claimed was struggling. Bella, driven by greed and envy, couldn't bear the thought of being a side piece. She wanted Kenneth entirely, his wealth, his name, his home, and she wasn't afraid to destroy anyone standing in her way. As the weeks passed, Kenneth fell deeper into her trap. He began to believe Bella's twisted words, that Adaora was dull, too village-minded, too religious, too predictable. Bella, on the other hand, was a storm of passion. She fed his darkest desires, introduced him to circles of influence and power, and constantly reminded him that a man like him deserved better. Adaora noticed the growing distance, the lack of intimacy, and the way Kenneth would avoid eye contact during family dinner. She asked him once if there was someone else, and he exploded with rage, accusing her of being insecure and paranoid. Adaora wept that night until her chest hurt. Still, she didn't confront him about Bella. She didn't want to fight for a man who no longer saw her worth. She wanted to understand why God was allowing her home to crumble. Bella, on her end, had grown tired of waiting. She knew Kenneth loved his son and still hesitated to fully abandon Adaora for fear of public backlash. So she devised a plan, a cruel, untraceable setup that would erase Adaora without bloodshed. Bella contacted an old friend who specialized in cyber fraud and blackmail, and together, they forged documents linking Adaora's name to stolen company funds, fabricated voice notes, and even set up an offshore account in her name. Kenneth, already blinded by lust and manipulation, signed off on it all, trusting Bella's plan would solve his problem quietly. When Bella asked, "Do you really want her out of your life?" Kenneth simply nodded. That nod would become the turning point. The moment he chose betrayal over loyalty, lust over love, and destruction over decency. And Adaora, unaware of the darkness closing in, continued praying for a miracle, not knowing her greatest battle was about to begin. The first sign came in the form of a knock at the door on a rainy Thursday morning. Adaora was still in her wrapper, preparing Jidenna's school lunch, when 3 stern-faced officers entered her home with a warrant for her arrest. Her heart dropped. "Madam Adaora Nwosu, you are under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering," one of them announced coldly. Jidenna dropped his spoon, eyes wide with confusion. "Mummy," he whimpered. Adaora's mind raced. Fraud? Embezzlement? She had never handled Kenneth's business finances. She barely left the house except for school runs and groceries. She tried to reason with the officers, begging to see the warrant again, but they had already handcuffed her in front of her crying son and shocked neighbors. Her screams echoed in the compound as Kenneth watched from the balcony, pretending to be confused. Bella, dressed in one of Adaora's stolen wrappers, watched from the window and smiled. At the police station, Adaora was interrogated, humiliated, and treated like a criminal. The evidence against her was overwhelming: bank statements, fake transactions, audio clips of her supposedly negotiating deals, and a foreign account in her name. She screamed her innocence, begged them to check with Kenneth, but when he finally arrived, he shook his head and told the officers, "Please, let the law take its course. If she's guilty, she must pay." That single sentence crushed her more than the accusations. The man she had given her entire life to, the father of her child, was willing to watch her rot in a cell without even hearing her out. Adaora fainted that night in her cell. When she woke up, she begged to see her son, but they told her Kenneth had taken full custody and blocked all access. The nightmare had begun, and there was no waking up. Days turned into weeks, and the press got wind of the story. Headlines read, "Wife of prominent logistics, CEO arrested for massive fraud." Adaora's pictures were plastered everywhere. Her church turned its back on her. Her family, shocked and confused, distanced themselves, embarrassed by the shame. In court, her defense was weak. No lawyer wanted to take a losing case. Kenneth sat at the back, holding Bella's hand, both of them dressed in black, pretending to mourn the betrayal. The judge, after weeks of proceedings, sentenced her to 12 years in prison without parole. As she was led away in chains, Adaora looked back at the courtroom. Her son was absent. Kenneth refused to meet her eyes. And Bella smirked. In that moment, a silent vow burned in Adaora's heart. "I will not die in this place. I will return. And when I do, I will burn everything you built on my blood." Prison was hell. Not the metaphorical kind spoken of in churches, but the real one, with cracked concrete floors, leaking ceilings, and the stench of sweat, blood, and despair. Adaora was thrown into a cell with 8 other women, all hardened by crime and time. The first night, they took her food. The second night, they took her shoes. By the third night, she learned to sleep with one eye open. The wardens treated her like filth, mocking her madam status, and using her as an example of how big women also fall. One slapped her for praying too loudly. Another locked her in solitary for crying too long. She wrote letters to Kenneth, begging him to let her see Jidenna, but no reply ever came. Her tears dried up, her heart hardened, and Adaora began to disappear, leaving behind a hollow shell of the woman she once was. In the 6th month of her sentence, she met Mama Peace, a woman in her 60s who had served 17 years for killing the man who raped her daughter. Mama Peace took one look at Adaora and saw through the brokenness. "They'd buried you before you died," she said one evening. "But don't worry, child, seeds grow best when buried in darkness." Those words struck Adaora like thunder. Slowly, she began to adapt, not just to survive, but to rebuild. Mama Peace taught her how to read legal documents, how to navigate prison politics, and how to protect herself. She helped Adaora find strength in pain and discipline in suffering. While the other women smoked and fought, Adaora studied. She read every law book she could find in the dusty prison library. She trained her body through silent exercise, her mind through fasting, and her spirit through relentless prayer. One rainy evening, while sitting in the prison yard, Adaora overheard 2 new inmates discussing a scandal involving Bella and Kenneth's logistics company. Apparently, Bella had been embezzling money through shell companies, using the same tactics they accused Adaora of. The whispers ignited something in her, a flicker of hope. If she could prove Bella's corruption, if she could reach someone beyond these walls, maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't entirely dead. She shared her thoughts with Mama Peace, who told her about a foundation called the Justice Revival, run by a woman named Barrister Kemi Ojo, who fought for wrongfully convicted women. Adaora made up her mind. She would survive prison. She would find this woman. And when she walked out of these gates, she would not come out silently. She would come out with vengeance, wrapped in wisdom. The hardest part of prison for Adaora wasn't the hunger, the beatings, or the isolation. It was the aching silence where her son's voice used to live. Jidenna had been her world, the light that danced through her eyes even during the darkest seasons. From the moment he was born, she had been a devoted mother, waking at dawn to prepare his lunchbox, singing him to sleep with lullabies, nursing his wounds with warmth and wisdom. In prison, every memory of him hurt like a blade twisting inside her chest. She used to count the days by how many mornings it had been since she last kissed his forehead. Now, she had stopped counting. Kenneth had cut off all access. Her letters were returned unopened. When she tried to reach him through prison officers, she was told that Jidenna had been told she died from emotional sickness shortly after the arrest. A stage burial was held, and Bella played the grieving friend beside Kenneth, deceiving the world while Adaora wasted away. One day, an officer assigned to laundry duty approached her secretly and whispered, "Madam, I day pity you. Dem talk say your son don day call Bella mummy now." The words shattered Adaora. She could handle the betrayal, even the pain. But the thought of her son being raised by the very woman who destroyed her, being fed lies in place of truth, venom in place of love, that broke her spirit in ways even prison never could. She spent the night sobbing on the cold cement floor, whispering prayers through her tears. "Lord, if I must suffer, so be it, but let my child know the truth one day. Don't let him grow up hating me." The sky outside wept with her as rain beat against the prison roof. In that stormy night, something in her began to die, not her will, but her dependence on the life she used to know. She was no longer that soft woman who baked pies and decorated her son's room with cartoon stickers. She was changing, growing into a new version of herself, forged in fire. Months passed. Adaora found ways to cope. She immersed herself in work and earned respect among fellow inmates. Mama Peace remained her guide and confidant. Through her connection with the kitchen staff, Adaora learned more disturbing news. Kenneth and Bella were building a brand empire off the same company Adaora helped nurture in its early stages. They used her story to gain sympathy, branding Bella as the woman who stayed strong after being betrayed by a criminal wife. The betrayal had layers deeper than betrayal itself. Her erasure was intentional. They didn't just want her imprisoned. They wanted her legacy erased, her motherhood rebranded, her truth buried. But Adaora didn't realize that outside those concrete walls, the tide of fate was beginning to shift. And though she didn't know it yet, justice was stirring, waiting for a chance to breathe. Prison was a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Every woman there had a story, and most of them were soaked in blood, betrayal, or hunger. Adaora, once sheltered by love and comfort, had become one of them. She began to walk like them, shoulders forward, eyes down. She ate in silence, washed in silence, and learned the rules quickly. Never take more than you need. Never show weakness. Never trust a smile. The wardens had no mercy. Some would ask for favors in exchange for soap or menstrual pads. Others would punish without reason. Once, Adaora stood up for a new inmate being slapped by an officer. Her reward was a night in solitary confinement with no water or food. But even in the darkness of that cell, she found strength. She started reciting Psalm 23 repeatedly, not as a religious exercise, but as an anchor, a reminder that even in the valley of death, she was not alone. It was Mama Peace who truly saved her sanity. A stout woman with tired eyes and a calm voice. Mama Peace had been in that prison so long that some officers called her Warden Mama. She never raised her voice, never begged for favors. She taught Adaora how to turn scraps of paper into notebooks, how to file complaints that didn't get shredded, how to command respect without raising a hand. She also taught Adaora how to breathe again. They took your life, yes, she told her one night under the dim cell bulb, but they didn't take your power. You're still a woman, and that means you're still dangerous. Those words lingered. Adaora started reading legal materials, writing down every memory she had of her arrest, and documenting names, dates, and inconsistencies in her case. Her once soft hands became calloused from work. Her body, lean from hunger, became sharper, more agile. Her mind, however, became her deadliest weapon. One afternoon, as she scrubbed toilets, she overheard two visiting lawyers laughing about a case Bella had botched. Money siphoned from Kenneth's company had attracted the attention of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. The name Bella Okeke kept surfacing in hushed tones around corridors. Adaora began to hope again. If Bella had slipped up, there might be a trail. But how would she connect the dots from behind bars? That night, Mama Peace told her, "There's a woman outside, Barrister Kemi Ojo. She runs the Justice Revival. Helped me appeal my daughter's case. But you need proof, paper, witness, anything." From that moment, Adaora began watching, listening, writing. Her pain now sharpened into purpose. She was no longer a prisoner waiting for time to pass. She was a hunter, wounded but calculating. And her prey, Kenneth and Bella, didn't know that the woman they buried alive was digging her way back to the surface, one claw mark at a time. While Adaora fought silently in prison, Kenneth was busy rewriting history. To eliminate any trace of scandal from his family's image, he decided to officially bury Adaora, metaphorically and literally. He forged a medical death certificate claiming she had passed away from complications in prison. With the help of a corrupt official, a private burial was arranged in a rented cemetery plot in Asaba. A simple coffin, filled with random clothes and cement blocks, was lowered into the ground. The ceremony was brief. Kenneth wore sunglasses and a black kaftan, looking solemn for the cameras. Bella clung to his arm, dressed in a designer black gown, dabbing fake tears with a white handkerchief. The news spread fast. Business mogul buries a estranged wife who died in prison. Sympathy flooded in. Kenneth was praised for his composure, and Bella for her loyalty. Together, they spun the narrative of moving forward with dignity. But behind closed doors, Kenneth was far from at peace. He suffered nightmares, visions of Adaora screaming in chains, accusing him in the rain. He often woke up drenched in sweat, startled by phantom whispers. Bella, on the other hand, was emboldened. With Adaora declared dead, she moved into the master bedroom, erased all of Adaora's belongings, and burned every photograph of her. Jidenna, confused and grieving, began to ask questions. Why was Mummy's body not brought home? Why didn't I see her before she died? Kenneth avoided answering. Bella filled the silence with lies. She didn't want you to see her like that, she'd say sweetly. But Jadena was not a fool. The memory of his mother's warmth was too strong, too alive to be erased. He often sneaked into the guest room and wept alone, whispering to God, "Please bring my mummy back." Back in prison, Adaora heard of her own death through a whisper passed by a sympathetic nurse. "Dem say you die. Dem bury your clothes." She stood still, cold and blank, as though someone had poured ice water down her spine. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply nodded, walked back to her cell, and stared at the wall for hours. They had killed her name, buried her truth. But they had also made a fatal mistake. They thought they had won. That night, she tore a piece of her bed sheet and wrote with a smuggled pen, "If they believe I'm dead, then I will rise like a ghost." But this time not to beg, to reclaim, to reveal, and to destroy. Mama Peace saw her that night and nodded. "Now you're ready," she said. "Now you're becoming who they feared most, a woman with nothing left to lose." The silence of being declared dead gave Adaora an unexpected advantage. She could now operate in shadows. While the world believed she no longer existed, she had time to plot, watch, and wait. Over the next few months, she gathered scraps of information like a scavenger digging for gold in dust. Her ears were sharpened, her eyes attentive. Prison officers gossiped often, thinking the dead woman wouldn't understand or matter. But Adaora remembered every name, every piece of paper, every file mentioned. She scribbled notes on old newspapers and wrapped them in plastic to hide beneath her mattress. She grew stronger, not just physically, but mentally. Her soul had crossed the threshold of grief and now lived on purpose alone. And that purpose was vengeance, not the chaotic kind, but the cold, calculated justice of a woman who had lost everything but her will to fight. Mama Peace introduced Adaora to an inmate named Sister Igioma, a former secretary who had been wrongly imprisoned for leaking her company's secrets to the press. Igioma had knowledge of Bella's financial trail. Before her arrest, she had worked for one of Kenneth's partner companies and had once come across suspicious transactions involving Bella's shell accounts. The two women began working together. Igioma helped Adaora build a timeline of Bella's corruption and advised her on whom to contact. Through a sympathetic chaplain, Adaora managed to send a secret letter to Barrister Kemi Ojo, the human rights lawyer Mama Peace had mentioned. The letter contained details of her case, names, dates, and a plea for help, written not as a victim, but as a woman seeking truth. Kemi, known for taking on hopeless cases, responded within weeks with a quiet visit to the prison. Barrister Kemi was unlike any woman Adaora had ever met, fierce, unrelenting, and dressed in ankara and power. She walked into the prison yard with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to aim the hammer of justice. She asked Adaora 100 questions, testing her memory, analyzing her tone. Then, in a low voice, she said, "I believe you, but we'll need to dig deeper. I'm not just going to get you out, I'm going to make them beg for mercy." Adaora's chest tightened. For the first time in years, someone believed her. Someone was willing to stand with her against the giants who buried her. Kemi promised to begin investigations discreetly. She would reach out to the EFCC, check the records, speak to a few judges. Adaora watched her walk away through the iron gates, her heart pounding. The world thought she was dead, but her story had just begun to breathe again, and the seeds of vengeance were already taking root. Barrister Kemi moved like a storm behind closed doors. Over the next several months, she assembled a team of legal investigators, forensic accountants, and journalists. She began unearthing Bella's web of deceit, tracking down financial documents from shell companies and linking them to the same patterns used to frame Adaora. The deeper she dug, the more rot she uncovered, including bribed police officers, forged evidence, and falsified bank records. What shocked her most was that Kenneth's signature was present on many of the fraudulent documents. It meant he wasn't just manipulated, he was an accomplice. Kemi didn't rush the process. She knew cases like this collapsed when handled carelessly. She built slowly, layer by layer, until the truth had a foundation stronger than any lie. Quietly, She filed a petition to reopen Adaora's case under the Nigerian Wrongful Conviction Review Commission. Meanwhile, back in prison, Adaora waited. She felt the shift in the air. The guards treated her differently, with caution now. Rumors spread that the dead woman's case was trending in government offices. Some inmates began to fear her. Others came to her with their own stories, hoping for rescue. Mama Peace smiled one night and said, "You're becoming fire, Adaora. Not everyone can survive the burn." And burn she did. Every night, she visualized her return, not to beg Kenneth for love, not to win her son back through tears. No, she was going to rewrite her name. She would rise as something unrecognizable, a woman stripped of everything except the power of her truth. She began preparing mentally for life after release. She asked for books on journalism, media law, and psychology. Her mind was no longer just a weapon. It was a machine rebuilding itself. Then one early morning, the prison gates opened, and a voice called out her name. A woman in a gray suit entered with a paper in hand. "You're being released. The court has found grounds to review your conviction," the officer said without emotion. Adaora's legs buckled, and for a second, she didn't move. Released? After all these years? She looked back at the cell that had caged her, then forward to the gates that once buried her name. As she walked out, Mama Peace stood silently behind the bars, her hands clasped. "Don't come back here," she whispered. Adaora nodded. "I won't. But I will come back for justice." The sun hit her skin like a warm slap. It was blinding, overwhelming, but real. She didn't have money, property, or a place to call home. But she had freedom, and a warrior's hunger for what was rightfully hers. Freedom tasted like dust and sunlight. Adaora stepped out of prison, a changed woman. Leaner, darker, fiercer. She wore a borrowed dress and carried nothing but a folder of documents in her hand. Barrister Kemi picked her up in a modest car with tinted windows. No media. No fanfare. Just silence. As they drove through Lagos traffic, Adaora stared at the world like an alien reborn. Children in uniforms laughed by the roadside. Hawkers shouted prices. Young lovers crossed hands on sidewalks. It felt surreal, like watching a life she had once known from behind a glass wall. Kemi offered her a place to stay at her safe house, a compound for women transitioning out of prison. Adaora accepted. It wasn't luxury, but it was sanctuary. For the first time in years, she slept in a clean bed with sheets that smelled of lavender, and woke up to birds instead of screaming. But freedom came with a price. Adaora had no job, no money, and a reputation stained by lies. She couldn't go back to her church. They still believed the headlines. Her family, too ashamed to face the truth, kept their distance. Even her younger sister, who once adored her, hadn't returned her calls. The world had moved on without her, and she was left to pick up shattered pieces. Yet she didn't break. She spent her days working in Kemi's legal foundation, helping process files, writing reports, and mentoring other survivors. At night, she studied journalism. The same tool used to destroy her would now become her voice. She began writing articles anonymously under the pseudonym The Phoenix. Her first piece, "The Woman They Buried Alive," detailing her prison experience and the corruption of silence. It went viral. People didn't know who she was, but they felt her pain, her fire. And in the shadows, Kenneth and Bella began to feel the heat. One evening, after a long day at the office, Kemi entered Adaora's room and placed a file on her bed. "Your husband and Bella, they don't know you're alive yet. But we're about to change that." Inside the file were copies of Bella's offshore transactions, fake company registrations, and a photo of Kenneth and Bella attending a charity gala under the campaign Healing After Betrayal. Adaora stared at it in silence, her eyes burning. "Let's get you in that company," Kemi said. "They're hiring for media consultants. Your qualifications still hold. We've cleaned your name from the database. You're going back, but this time as a stranger. And when the time is right, you will take everything back. Not just your name, your son, your legacy, your dignity." Adaora clenched her jaw and nodded slowly. The battle had moved to a new terrain. and she was ready to play. The mirror reflected someone Adaora barely recognized. Gone were the prison rags and weary eyes of a woman buried by betrayal. In their place stood a lean, sharp-featured woman with bold eyes, coiled braids wrapped into a powerful crown, and a posture forged by survival. She had changed her name legally to Adaora Okonkwo, with help from Kemi's legal team. Her credentials had been quietly reinstated, her records cleaned. No one outside the legal system would trace the name back to Adaora Nwosu, not unless they looked beyond her eyes and into her soul. With a degree in mass communication and her past experience at Kenneth's firm, Kemi helped her secure an interview with K-Prime Logistics, Kenneth's company, the very company she helped build before being thrown away. The plan was dangerous. It was bold. But Adaora didn't flinch. She wasn't walking into the lion's den to beg for crumbs. She was going in to burn the entire cage down. The day of the interview arrived with tension crackling in the air. Dressed in a fitted navy blue blazer and pencil skirt, Adaora stepped into the glass tower where her life had once lived. Every tile, every scent brought back memories. Board meetings where she served coffee, company retreats she had organized, late-night sessions when Kenneth was just a dreamer with a briefcase. She kept her head high, voice confident. Her interviewer, a senior HR executive named Mr. Alice, was charmed by her intelligence and vision. "We're actually expanding our media unit," he said. "You may be the breath of fresh air we need." 2 days later, she was offered the job, a media consultant position, reporting directly to the communications director, who answered to Kenneth. Adaora accepted without hesitation. No one recognized her. Her skin was slightly darker from the sun, her voice now firm, her smile cold and polite. Bella, of course, barely stepped into the office these days. She was too busy posing for paparazzi and spending Kenneth's money on personal branding. But that would change soon. Adaora's first week was spent observing everything. She arrived early, stayed late, and memorized everyone's movements. Kenneth rarely came to the media floor, but held meetings on the top floor, where he ran operations. He looked older, more stressed. His hair had started to gray, and though he laughed in meetings, there was a hollowness behind his eyes. Adaora, hiding behind a new name, began gathering files, making copies of communication logs, tracking Bella's media statements, and feeding evidence to Kemi. Kenneth's personal assistant, Tund, started warming up to her. "You're different from the others," he once said, smiling. "Focused. Not here for attention." Adaora nodded, hiding the rage burning beneath her ribs. She didn't need attention. She needed results. Every step she took within that company was another nail in the coffin of the empire they built on her blood. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a storm hiding in plain sight. Adaora Nwosu had grown into a quiet, withdrawn teenager. At 16, he was tall and intelligent, but his eyes always seemed to be searching for something, someone. Since his mother's death, he had never truly smiled. His relationship with Kenneth was strained. Kenneth had grown colder, more controlling, and was often absent. Bella, now his stepmother, tried to buy his affection with designer clothes and expensive gadgets, but Adaora never took to her. "Stop calling me Mummy," he snapped once. "You're not her." That had earned him a hard slap and a week without his phone. Adaora didn't cry. He never did. He simply shut down. He kept a photo of Adaora hidden in a novel on his shelf, the last one they took before her arrest. Sometimes he would wake up from dreams where she was calling him, trapped behind bars, her face hollow. The confusion in his heart had grown into silent rebellion. At school, Adaora became close to a teacher named Mr. Daimeji, a literature teacher who reminded him of the warmth he once felt at home. Mr. Daimeji noticed the boy's sadness and often encouraged him to write. "When the world fails to hear you, write until your truth screams," he once told him. One afternoon, while searching for pictures for an assignment, Adaora stumbled on a blog post titled, "The Woman They Buried Alive." Something about it drew him in. He read it 3 times. The tone, the pain, the strength. It was as though the writer had lived his mother's life. At the end of the article it was signed The Phoenix. He printed it and kept it close. That night he asked Kenneth, "Why didn't Mummy want me to see her before she died?" Kenneth, caught off guard, muttered something about sickness and privacy. Jadena stared at him for a long time. "Did she really die, Dad?" he asked. Kenneth's eyes twitched, but he barked, "Don't ask foolish questions." That was the moment Jadena's suspicion began to grow. He started snooping, checking his father's drawers, computer folders, files. One evening, while looking through a stack of old photo albums, he found an envelope marked Anne with court papers inside. And there it was, his mother's original case file, her supposed confession. The documents were inconsistent. The signature wasn't hers. And on one of the documents, he found a name scribbled. Bella Okeke, witness. Jadena froze. Why would Bella be the main witness in a case where his mother was accused of stealing from Kenneth? The truth cracked open. He had been lied to. And now, with questions swirling in his chest, Jadena began to wonder, who was the Phoenix? Could it be her? Was his mother still alive? And, if so, why had she not come for him? Adana had been working at Cape Prime Logistics for 2 months now, and each day was a careful chess game. She had gained access to the internal archives and had begun downloading sensitive documents that linked Kenneth and Bella to multiple tax fraud violations and secret offshore investments. Her plan was working. Kenneth still hadn't recognized her. Perhaps his guilt made him blind. But the closer she got to his inner circle, the more dangerous it became. One afternoon, while leaving a strategy meeting, she overheard Tund mentioning an upcoming media event. "Kenneth wants to make it big," he said. "Announce a new partnership. Even Bella will show face." That word, partnership, lit a spark in Adana's mind. If they were going public, she had to move quickly. She reached out to Kemi that night and arranged for a confidential reporter to be placed at the event. "Make sure they're ready," she whispered, "because I'm about to drop the first match." But Bella was not sleeping either. Rumors had reached her that someone new at the company was asking too many questions. She asked Kenneth about the new media staff. "Adana Okonkwo," he said casually. "Brilliant, focused. Bit intense." Bella grew suspicious. One morning, she arranged a surprise visit to the office. Dressed in a white jumpsuit and gold heels, she walked in unannounced, her presence swallowing the room. Adana, seated at her desk, looked up slowly. Their eyes met. For a split second, time stopped. Bella's lips curled into a polite smile. "You're new here?" she asked. Adana stood, her voice calm. "Yes." "Adana, media team." Bella tilted her head, eyes narrowing. There was something about the woman, something too composed, too familiar. She didn't say more. But as she left, she whispered to herself, "I've seen that face before." That evening, Adana sent a final encrypted folder to Kemi. Audio files, documents, voice notes Kenneth had sent Bella. Every piece of the puzzle was complete. She sat by her window, watching the Lego skyline as her heart beat in her chest like a war drum. They had stolen her child, buried her name, declared her dead. But now, she was in the belly of the beast, and they didn't even know it. The media event would be in 2 days. She would attend. She would watch them gloat. And then she would bring their empire crashing down with the truth. Not through screams or tears, but through strategy, evidence, and public exposure. "You buried the wrong woman," she whispered into the dark. "Now, I'll bury your lies in front of the world." Bella Okeke could feel something slipping. It started with whispers in the boardroom, glances exchanged between employees, and then the growing tension in Kenneth's demeanor. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. She had clawed her way to the top of Kenneth's empire with her beauty, cunning, and ruthless ambition. But something had shifted since that new media consultant, Adana, arrived. She was quiet, observant, almost invisible, yet Bella felt watched. One evening, she asked Kenneth, "Are you sure you've never met this Adana before?" Kenneth laughed it off. "She's just a sharp worker." "Why?" Bella shrugged, but her instinct screamed. That night, she sat in her personal study and dug into Adana's file. Nothing unusual. Graduated from Unilag, worked with media houses, no criminal record. Yet something about her name and eyes haunted Bella. Her unease grew into obsession. Over the next few days, Bella tried to assert control. She returned to the office more frequently, snapping at staff, demanding project reports, and micromanaging Kenneth's decisions. Kenneth grew irritated. "You're acting paranoid," he told her in a board meeting. "This company needs calm, not chaos." Bella, humiliated in front of the directors, stormed out. But she couldn't let go of her suspicion. She arranged for one of her tech-savvy friends to trace Adaora's past deep into her digital footprints. What they uncovered stunned her. Adaora's data trail had a blank space between 2015 and 2024. A whole 9-year gap. No employment, no travel, no digital activity. Bella's face went cold. "Nobody disappears for 9 years without a reason," she said. "Find out who she really is." But even as she dug, Adaora moved quietly, methodically, removing the ground beneath their feet one file at a time. Meanwhile, Adaora continued playing her role. She smiled at Kenneth in meetings, nodded respectfully at Bella, and listened more than she spoke. But every minute she spent inside that building was a step closer to destruction. She watched Bella unravel from a distance. The once confident mistress had become erratic, snapping at staff, dressing less flamboyantly, and showing up uninvited to team huddles. Kenneth, sensing instability, began pulling away. Adaora made sure to plant small seeds, emails suggesting poor brand reputation, social media posts that hinted at internal corruption. She connected with anonymous influencers to spread subtle rumors about Bella's alleged misappropriation. The cracks were forming. Bella, who once orchestrated Adaora's downfall with ease, now couldn't sleep at night. The power she once held was slipping through her fingers like sand. And the woman she buried, the one she called the obstacle, was now the storm she couldn't contain. Adaora sat alone on the rooftop of his school hostel, the wind gently brushing his face as he held the printed blog article in his hands for the 100th time. The woman they buried alive. The words danced with pain and power. He had always felt something wasn't right about his mother's so-called death. His dreams, his gut, even her photo tucked in his drawer, all whispered the same thing: she's not gone. His recent discovery of the court documents and the inconsistencies around Bella's role as a witness confirmed it. Now he was certain. The woman who wrote the article wasn't just any activist. She was his mother. The emotions overwhelmed him: anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion. Why hadn't she come for him? Did she think he believed their lies? Had she moved on without him? He returned home during the weekend with a plan. He greeted Kenneth coldly, avoided Bella entirely, and waited until nightfall. While the house slept, he sneaked into Kenneth's home office and copied files onto a flash drive. Files that contained transaction records, case files, and communications between Kenneth and Bella from 2015. What he saw broke him. Kenneth's voice notes instructing Bella to clean things up before the court hearing. A scanned copy of the fake medical death certificate. Even a budget breakdown for Adaora's fake burial expenses. He covered his mouth to keep from screaming. They hadn't just lied. They had murdered his mother's identity and built a false life on her grave. Adaora made his decision. The next morning, he uploaded select documents to a private Google Drive and anonymously sent the link to the same blog that had hosted the Phoenix's story. When Adaora checked her email 2 days later and saw the anonymous submission titled, "They Killed My Mother on Paper," from her son, she froze. The moment she read the first sentence, "My name is Adaora Nwosu, and I don't believe my mother is dead," her hands trembled. The words pierced her like a sword. Her son, her baby. He knew. He believed. She wept for the first time in years, not from pain, but from hope. Kemi, who read the post with her, said, "He's reaching out. But we can't move emotionally. We move smart." They coordinated a plan. That same week, the blog released a follow-up story. Buried Lies, new evidence links Kenneth and Bella to fraud, cover-up, and false imprisonment. The article went viral overnight. The press exploded. Bella panicked. Kenneth called an emergency PR meeting. And Adaora sat silently in the back, watching the chaos begin. The conference hall at Eco's Signature Hotel was packed with journalists, influencers, brand representatives, and curious onlookers. Kenneth stood at the podium, visibly stressed, flanked by Bella, who wore dark glasses and a forced smile. The event was supposed to be a triumphant announcement of K-Prime Logistics' expansion into West Africa, but instead, it had become a media bloodbath. Reporters bombarded them with questions about the blog posts. Is it true your late wife was wrongfully imprisoned? Why did Bella testify as the main witness in a fraud case involving your spouse? Can you confirm or deny the recent leaks showing company funds diverted to foreign accounts under Bella's name? Kenneth stuttered. Bella looked pale. They denied everything, of course. This is an orchestrated attack, Kenneth claimed. We are victims of a smear campaign. But the room was no longer convinced. The applause they were used to was now replaced with murmurs of doubt. At the back of the room, Adaora stood, holding her phone, live streaming the conference. She wore a crimson blouse and black trousers, simple but commanding. Her eyes didn't blink. She watched every bead of sweat on Kenneth's forehead, every tremble in Bella's lip. She had infiltrated their walls, poisoned their throne, and now she was showing the world their nakedness. Beside her, Kemi's reporter captured every minute. A few other whistleblowers Kemi had activated online flooded Twitter with side-by-side photos of Adaora and Adaora, with captions like, "The ghost in the room," and "The real woman behind the empire." Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Justice for Adaora, hashtag Bella the Liar, and hashtag K-Prime Exposed. Sponsors began to pull out. Board members threatened resignation. Kenneth left the podium abruptly. Bella followed in tears. The mighty empire had begun to rot from the inside. That night, Kenneth's mansion was flooded with press vans. Bella locked herself in the bathroom, refusing to eat. Kenneth broke 2 wine glasses and fired 2 managers via text. And across the city, in the quiet shelter where Adaora now lived, she sat with Kemi in the dim light of victory. "They're falling apart," Kemi said, scrolling through headlines. "But we're not done." Adaora nodded. "It's not enough for them to lose what they stole. The world needs to know who I am. Adaora needs to know his mother never abandoned him." She looked out the window at the city below. "They wanted me dead, but I became a voice. And now that voice will roar." Her moment had come. Not as Adaora, not even as Adaora the victim, but as Adaora the vindicated. And soon, she would stand before the world, not to ask for justice, but to deliver it. Bella never liked silence, but on this night, it surrounded her like a coffin. Her designer heels were abandoned by the door, her phone buzzing with unanswered calls, and her social media accounts had exploded with threats, mockery, and demands for accountability. She curled up on the tiled floor of her luxury bathroom, shivering despite the heat. She had built her entire existence on glamour and manipulation, from seducing Kenneth to orchestrating Adaora's imprisonment. But now, her empire was slipping like sand through clenched fists. The viral expose had shattered the illusion of her innocence, and the media, once her ally, had turned rabid. With every reposted video, every before and after photo comparing her to the real Adaora, Bella felt her world collapsing. But it wasn't just the court of public opinion she had to worry about. It was the EFCC, now officially investigating her role in financial misconduct and false testimony. Kenneth, too, was unraveling. He had always prided himself on being in control, on presenting himself as the polished, principled CEO who could do no wrong. But in the boardroom, investors had turned their backs. Half the company's executive team had resigned. A major client canceled their contract. And now he couldn't leave his home without being chased by journalists screaming, "Where is Adaora Nwosu? Did you fake your wife's death? Is it true your son is leaking documents against you?" Kenneth confronted Adaora one morning with fury. "Did you send those files? You're trying to destroy everything I built." But Adaora looked him in the eye for the first time in years and said, "You destroyed it the day you betrayed my mother." The slap Kenneth delivered was immediate, a loud, final punctuation to their broken relationship. Adaora didn't flinch. He packed a bag that same night and left, heading to Barrister Kemi's office. Meanwhile, Adaora, now surrounded by a team of media experts, lawyers, and advocates, was preparing for the next move. She hadn't revealed her identity publicly yet, despite the blog posts and social speculation. She wanted it to be official, indisputable, and unforgettable. But before that, she had one more card to play. Through a hidden camera she had planted months earlier in Kenneth's office, she captured a crucial recording, a conversation between him and Bella discussing their fear of the truth coming out and regretting how they handled the Adaora situation. With that video evidence, Kemi moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, Bella was arrested at her Ikoyi apartment. The footage aired on national TV, Bella in handcuffs, hiding her face as officers escorted her into a black van. Adaora watched the clip in silence, her fingers clenched tightly around her phone. "One down," she whispered. "Now it's your turn, Kenneth." The world paused when the official press invitation went out. An exclusive national interview with the Phoenix, the woman who rose from her grave. Social media exploded. Who was she? Was she really Adaora Nwosu? Was she alive all along? The speculation reached fever pitch. Live streams were scheduled. TV anchors rehearsed introductions. Commentators debated the legal implications. Kenneth refused to believe it. He had been living in denial, convincing himself that Adaora was just someone digging for attention. But now, with Bella behind bars and his son gone, the walls were closing in. He hired a crisis manager to try to block the interview. But it was too late. Kemi's legal team had made the announcement airtight. The interview was happening, on live television, with the world watching. The platform? Nigeria's most trusted investigative journalism show. The date? Exactly 1 month after Bella's arrest. The location? Undisclosed for Adaora's safety. The day came like thunder. Cameras flashed. Millions tuned in from around the world. The host, a poised and respected journalist named Funmi Bako, welcomed viewers and introduced the moment everyone had been waiting for. Tonight, we speak with the woman Nigeria thought was dead, framed, buried, and forgotten. Please welcome Mrs. Adaora Nwosu. As the camera panned to the stage, the audience gasped. Adaora walked out in a simple white gown, her natural hair braided neatly, her shoulders strong. The scars on her wrist were visible. She didn't smile. She sat calmly and began to speak. Her voice didn't shake. "I was betrayed by my husband and his mistress. I was arrested for a crime I did not commit. I was imprisoned for 9 years. They told the world I died. They buried my name. But I lived. I survived. And now I am here to reclaim my truth." The nation wept. The interview was raw, honest, and piercing. Adaora detailed everything. The setup, her prison years, the torture, the day she found hope again through Kemi, and the journey back to the very company that once erased her. She spoke with clarity, with no bitterness in her tone, just truth. When asked about her son, she teared up. "Jadena, if you're watching, I never abandoned you. I fought for you every day in silence. I prayed you would remember me. And now that I know you believed in me, I have peace." That moment broke the internet. Hashtag Adaora Lives trended #1 worldwide. The nation demanded justice. Protesters gathered at the gates of K-Prime Logistics. Kenneth, watching from his mansion, collapsed to the floor in disbelief. The ghost he buried had risen, not to haunt, but to testify. Kenneth's arrest was not dramatic. It was surgical. A team of EFCC operatives, armed with warrants and documents provided by Kemi's team, arrived at his office just 3 days after Adaora's televised interview. He was handcuffed quietly in front of his staff and let out of the building that once bore his name. The very employees he used to command now stood silently, not one offering him a word of support. The video of his arrest was short and sharp, the once celebrated CEO being placed in the back of a van while journalists shouted, "What do you have to say about Adaora?" He said nothing. For the first time, Kenneth Nwosu was truly silent. The walls of his empire, built on lies, were crumbling. Bella, still in custody, had turned on him, offering plea bargain information in exchange for a lighter sentence. The betrayal was complete. He had destroyed a queen and ended up in chains. The court proceedings were swift. With a mountain of evidence, including the hidden recordings, forged documents, and Bella's confession, Kenneth was found guilty on multiple charges: conspiracy, perjury, fraud, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Bella received 10 years for her role, her tearful courtroom apologies doing little to change public opinion. Adaora sat in the front row of the courtroom on Judgment Day, wearing a simple Ankara gown, her son Jidenna seated beside her. When the sentence was read, she didn't smile. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "It is finished." Outside the courthouse, crowds chanted her name. Victim groups hailed her courage. Women who had been silenced for years now saw her as a symbol of hope. She didn't raise her fist. She didn't celebrate. She just walked out quietly with her son, a free woman in every sense of the word. That night, in a candlelit memorial held by women's rights organizations, Adaora stood before a crowd and shared one final thought. "I was never meant to rise," she said. "They made sure of that. But you cannot kill the truth. You can bury it, lie about it, mock it, and even write its obituary. But in time, truth will rise. And when it does, it will not knock. It will break the door down." The audience erupted in applause. Jidenna held her hand, tears rolling down his cheeks. He finally had his mother back, not the fragile woman they had tried to erase, but the warrior who rose from the ashes. And as fireworks lit up the sky in honor of her strength, Adaora looked up with a smile that reached the heavens. Justice had been done. The woman they buried alive had risen, not just to live, but to lead. The days that followed the courtroom victory felt surreal for Adaora. After years of being silenced, erased, and buried, she now walked freely through streets where people stopped her to say, "You gave us hope." But hope wasn't what she had when she entered that prison in handcuffs 9 years ago. She had nothing. She had been stripped of her dignity, her voice, her family, and most painfully, her child. To walk through the fire and still stand was not just survival. It was rebirth. The world now saw her not as a victim, but as a warrior, a symbol of truth that refused to stay hidden. Still, the spotlight was not her goal. She had never craved attention, fame, or applause. All she ever wanted was to live a simple life in love, peace, and purpose. And now, she would do just that, on her terms. She declined book deals, reality TV offers, and even a documentary proposal. Instead, she opened the Rising Voice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal support for wrongly imprisoned women, victims of domestic betrayal, and those forgotten by the system. With the help of Barrister Kemi and others, she built a team of lawyers, counselors, and former inmates, determined to turn her pain into power. Her first initiative was the Phoenix Scholarship, named after her anonymous pen name, offering education to children of incarcerated women. Her second was a weekly prison visitation program, where she went back to the place they had tried to destroy her, not with bitterness, but to extend a hand to the ones still trapped in silence. The first time she walked back into that prison yard and hugged Mama Peace, the women gathered around her like she was royalty. But she humbled herself. "I'm not your savior," she said. "I'm just your sister who made it out." As for Jidenna, healing took time. The reunion was emotional and difficult. He had so many questions. Why didn't she run? Why didn't she fight back earlier? Why did she let them win for so long? Adaora answered him honestly. "Because I wasn't ready. I had to lose everything to understand what I truly had. And that was you." Over time, they rebuilt their bond. They began taking evening walks, attending therapy together, and cooking old recipes from the past. For the first time since he was 7 years old, Jidenna laughed freely. He started referring to her not just as Mummy, but as the strongest woman I know. Kenneth and Bella faded into the corners of history, their names remembered not for what they built, but for what they destroyed. Adaora, however, became something greater, not just a woman who survived, but a woman who redefined survival. The final headlines didn't read, "Adaora escapes injustice." They read, "The woman they buried alive became the voice that could not be silenced." And in the quiet of her new home, surrounded by flowers and laughter, Adaora finally exhaled. Her story wasn't just over. It had only just begun. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.